Hey, welcome to my video. I think I'd like to present a project I completed pretty recently. I titled it The Dialogue of the Lord, taken from every book of the Bible, and of course that's my name. That's who did it. I began this project around my time of confirmation, that was 2022. I was wanting to highlight dialogue from the New Testament books, specifically the Gospel according to John. And I found that while doing so, you could highlight the dialogue from Jesus to the disciples or Jesus to the Pharisees. And then once I took out the narration, I realized the work still made sense. And I thought that was so cool. So I began doing it for the rest of the Gospels. And once I completed those, I was like, whoa, I gotta do the Old Testament now. And so a lot of time has passed. I went through my military training and now I'm here. I completed it. Here we can see my table of contents. It is quite a lot of pages, I'm not gonna lie. I think it's just because of how I formatted it. I have spaces between each of the dialogues. So here you can see that what I mean. I have space between each of the dialogues. So that's why it takes up a lot of space. Because my formatting isn't perfect, I'm not gonna lie to you. But before I go down there, let me explain what I mean by two sections. In the first section, I have every single book with all their dialogue. I did skip the Psalms. I apologize. I am not cut out to do the Psalms. And the New Testament. You can see there's much fewer books in the New Testament to go through. I'd like to talk a little bit about each set of books before I move on. In the Pentateuch, I realized how much the Pentateuch is ordered by dialogue. You can see from Genesis to Exodus to Leviticus, Numbers, and finally Deuteronomy, the amount of influence the Lord has just through his speech and guiding the people, guiding Israel to become their own nation state. In Genesis, you see him create the world, and then it goes from being like the Lord heavy dialogue down to the people themselves really running things. And then Exodus, he's like, I'm back. We got the Exodus. Leviticus, it's like the entire thing of Leviticus is just quotations from what the Lord told Moses to do. Numbers, you still have a lot of quotations. It's another dialogue focused book, not as much as the Exodus. And then finally Deuteronomy is almost the entire book of Deuteronomy. It's just Moses expounding upon what he's learned from the Lord to the people, telling them like, listen, please listen and do this and you will be blessed. The historical books are pretty good. A lot of takeaways there. Kings and Chronicles are pretty much the same books with dialogue options, but there's set differences between them. The biblical novellas almost have not a single instance of the Lord's dialogue. Now, here I have to make a caveat, because Tobit, you know that in Tobit, there's an angel speaking to Tobit and leading him through the story. But I didn't count everything the angel said there as the Lord's dialogue. So here's the first point I want to make, is that this is, of course, my own doing, so not everything in here is perfect. It is not a perfect translation of what is and what isn't the Lord's word. Because if we're going to get deep into it, everything that is said is the Lord's word. We are just borrowing his words. The wisdom books, not too many words in here from the Lord. Job has a great passage, an incredible passage. And then I think Song of Songs has nothing. Proverbs might quote him once. But here's the meat of the Old Testament. The prophets, bro. These prophets whooped me. I almost gave up doing Isaiah. He was the last book I did, and it was very difficult. He speaks in such a way that it's like, is Isaiah narrating right now, or is it still an oracle that is the Lord's word? It was very difficult for me to understand. So at times I may take too much from him, that when he's actually narrating, and there may also be times where I take too little and the Lord actually spoke more there. So I apologize, but it was pretty difficult. I would say the rest of the prophets weren't that difficult to understand. Ezekiel had some moments, Jeremiah had some moments, but Isaiah was definitely a very difficult author to understand when he was speaking and when the Lord himself was speaking. I mean, what can I say about the New Testament? I think John is the most beautiful book ever written. The dialogue in John is incredible. The formatting of John is beautiful. The way it all fits together is just... I would love to gush over John more and more. The Acts of the Apostles is an incredible story. You see the links of the disciples finally understanding what is going on. And then Revelation almost reads like an Old Testament prophet. The way things are said, the way things are formatted, the Lord's condemnation of the specific churches, it is almost like an Old Testament prophetic book. So what is this second section that we have here? Here in the second section, I took everything that is explicitly what I marked down as the Lord's dialogue from the Old and the New Testament, and then I took their exact verses so you know where they are, and I ordered those passages longest to shortest, which is really cool in my opinion. I'll explain more about that later. Here we can kind of see the formatting. In red is, of course, the Lord's word. Black is the narration that is not, the dialogue that is not the Lord. And if you work through this, you'll see that I'm doing chapter by chapter in some of the books, and then in other books I'm doing explicit verse to verse definings. I don't know how to say that, but yeah, in Genesis you see me doing verse to verse. Let me scroll down. Here you can tell so much of the work. Is this Numbers? Let me go up farther. It might be Exodus. Yeah. In Exodus, you still have a lot of dialogue between the Lord and Moses or the people, but here he goes more and more of like just him explaining what has to be done. Let me scroll down farther. Oops. Leviticus, almost all of it is the Lord. Deuteronomy is almost all Moses. And then let's go farther down, way farther down. A lot of the prophets are almost all just quotations from what the Lord is saying. So here we have Ezekiel. Oh, and here you see what I mean by the difference between the way I formatted the work. So here we have the exact chapter and verse for each dialogue, but in Genesis, maybe through up to the prophets, or maybe up through wow, I'm blanking on my words. But the wisdom literature, it's just chapter by chapter. But yet, you can see here in Ezekiel that so much of it is just the Lord trying to speak to them and guide them and tell them to return to follow his statutes. A lot of prophecies too. And then if we go down, Daniel, beautiful book. There we go, into the Gospels. We have Mark, and here again I see another type of formatting where it's not even, I don't even have chapters here. So if I was to revise this work, I would go through and probably do it the way you just saw in Ezekiel, where I would give every single dialogue its chapter and verse. But the reason I started out not doing chapter and verses was to just show the readability of the dialogue itself. Hopefully we can skip through Luke and get to John, my favorite. Here's John. It's a beautiful piece. Alright, let me go all the way down and show you what I mean by second act. I think I am missing, in one of Paul's letters, he quotes the Lord speaking to him 2 to 3 times, and I don't think I have those letters on here. If I was to revise, I would go through and have those. And then I think James also has a quote from the Lord. And here's the second section. This is the part I was really enthusiastic about. This is a very important work to myself, where I have taken everything that I have compiled, that the Lord has said through the Bible, and put it into a single document source, ordered from his longest section of words to his shortest, down to his single word responses. Here you can see that the longest passage of the Lord's dialogue in the entire Bible is Exodus. This is where he is designing and explaining to Moses how the temple in the desert is supposed to be constructed. It's a beautiful passage. And then the second longest is Leviticus, on how the Israelites are supposed to worship and what they're supposed to do in ablutions and sacrifices. And then another one from Exodus, telling them they're a special place amongst him and in his heart. And then Ezekiel, again, another temple creation. So much focus on temple and correct worship. And then finally, Matthew 5 and 7, a beautiful, beautiful passage of the blessedness of the poor. It's almost like the moral teachings of the Lord. Whereas before it was the temple creation, the correct sacrifices, as the religious understanding of him. But now it's like the interpersonal morals that each person is supposed to live by, and expounding of his 10 commandments. But let me not get too hype. And then Matthew 24 through 25. I think if I combine those two, because they seem to work so well off each other, it would probably be the longest passage in the Bible. But I'm not going to do that. Leviticus, and then let me scroll down all the way to where you can see the one-word responses that the Lord has. Haggai, no. His shortest response. Of course, you can see here else some of these formattings are not perfect. A lot of my John titles, the abbreviated Johns, are missing the spaces after them, so it's not a perfect work right now. It would require a little bit more formatting, but as it is and as it stands, it's worthwhile to read, in my opinion. So I thought I should share it because this is so cool in my eyes. And in a way, it almost makes the Bible more agreeable, more understandable, more accessible. It gives a focus to the Lord's word, which I think is the importance of the Bible. It shows the Lord's love for humanity. Yeah, it's incredible. And then you can see how it's mixed up with like the Old and the New Testament. There is, of course, so many more words from the Lord in the Old Testament that it kind of dwarfs the New Testament, but there's the congruency there between the two that is shown through this ordering from longest to shortest. Yeah, well, I don't think there's any way for me to publish this work, as I've used so much of the New American Bible in it to where I don't think it fits their guidelines to be able to publish. Maybe I could reach out to them, but I don't know, I'm not going to right now. So because I'm not sure about publishing, I'm also not going to make this easily accessible online for the moment. Yeah, I hope you think this is a cool idea and a cool project. Just thought I should share it. Take care, everybody.